Have gotten us on a good path, and the new board and myself are going to endeavor to stay on that path and maybe even broaden it a little bit. So with your help, I think we'll be able to accomplish a lot. As I mentioned in the newsletter, this is a leap year, and we intend to jump forward big time this year for the Society and for the museum. So let's start out by standing to a pledge the flag. That's over there in the corner, and here we go. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you. Let's see, a couple of things that I want to mention that the board met on Tuesday night and we discussed a ton of things, and we were there for a couple hours and we only got about halfway through some of the things that we want to talk about. Now, I'm not going to bore you with everything that we talked about. There are a couple of things that I think are noteworthy, especially given the fact that this is a very, very important year for the Society and for the museum. And we're referring to it as the celebration year. And the reason I say that is because it's 40-30-10. That's not motor oil. It's 40 years for, where's that?
The incorporation.
The incorporation of the
Historical Society.
Historical Society is 40 years.
30 years since we bought the house.
30 years ago we bought the house, and 10 years ago the museum was established. So you can see a lot of stuff is going to stack up for 2020. And Maureen has a lot of ideas in the back of her head in terms of how to celebrate these various functions. So kind of watch the newsletter, keep your ear to the ground, and we're going to have some fun times for various things throughout the year. One of the things that we are going to do is we are going to do a brick pathway in front of the museum. Now, I'm sure, especially the ladies, if you have walked into the front porch during a rainy day in any kind of a heel, you've probably not had the best of thoughts. It's been probably pretty gushy. Well, we think a brick pathway going from the driveway to the front walk will solve a lot of those problems. And the way we're going to fund that is we're going to give you the opportunity to buy a brick in memory of yourself or somebody else. And the bricks will be engraved and then placed professionally by a contractor. So that is something that we're kicking off officially tonight. We have order blanks here that you're welcome to take. The bricks are $50 for members, $60 for non-members. If you'd like to buy more than one, feel free. Buy 10, buy 6, buy 1, whatever, okay? Our goal is we need a total of 1,100 bricks in the front. Now, I'm not saying that we're going to sell 1,100 bricks, okay? I'm naive, but I'm not that naive. But we are hoping to sell at least 200, and we think we can do that. So if every member buys at least one and other people in the community also step up and buy others, I think the 200 brick goal is realistic. And again, $50 per brick, $60 for non-members. And I think that's a realistic goal for us to hit. So that's one thing that we're doing. The other thing is that to go along with that, Maureen would like to have a ribbon cutting ceremony when that pathway is finished. And she would like to do it in May because May has some significance in the celebration year. And I can't remember if it's the 40, 30, or 10, but it's one of those that happens in May. So we are going to be celebrating that particular function or that event in the month of May. So again, kind of keep that in mind. As far as the bricks are concerned, we've got a projected date to have all the bricks sold not later than April the 10th. So we've got lots of time. Doesn't mean you need to think until April 9th as to whether or not you're gonna buy one, but just know that you need to have all of your information into us not later than April 10th. The time frame that it will take to actually install the pathway is not that long. It's only like 2 days. The contractor that I've been talking to has said they can fit it in with no problem. So it'll be a pretty rapid construction period. The only thing that we don't know yet, and we're still kind of trying to figure this out, is if someone steps forward in July or August, maybe they're visiting the museum, maybe they have family that they would like to have in memory, can we take up some of the unengraved bricks and replace them with engraved bricks without disrupting the walkway in any way? So that we're kind of still looking at and trying to figure out what the best way is to do that. So, any questions on the pathway as the kind of the first project? Yes, ma'am.
Does the form include recommendations as to some of the things that can be printed, or limitations per line, or numbers of lines and all that?
Yes. There are it's a 3-line minimum, I'm sorry, 3-line maximum, and 25 characters per line maximum. And that's pretty liberal.
Yeah.
We did have another option to go 4 lines, but then you drop down to 20 characters per line. So we opted to go for more characters and fewer lines. We can do logos, we can't do pictures. We can do logos, but we can't do pictures. Because pictures get, when you sandblast a picture, you lose a lot of the detail and it just doesn't look good. So if you have a logo that you'd like to put on, not a problem. There is an additional charge, and that will be determined down the road as well, because we needed to work with the company that's providing the bricks to let us know what they will charge to do logos. It's not a lot. I did talk with them the other day, and they said it's probably going to be in the neighborhood of $20 to $25 for a logo. That may be negotiable. Any other questions?
Where exactly are you talking about putting them?
Right out front, from the driveway across the lawn to the front walkway. Okay. And yes, and from the street to the first step, when you come off the street to that first step.
Somebody has designed it.
Yes, yeah. It's a pretty tough design, straight line.
I think it would be good if you would allow like 6 months or a year, and everybody that did not get their chance, somebody who's coming in new, within that 6 month period or year period, do them all at once. Don't do it brick by brick, and then you won't
No,
mess it.
we're gonna-
And then you won't mess it up.
Yeah, we're gonna accumulate, so we're not, once we start selling bricks, we're not gonna start laying the bricks, we're gonna accumulate everything until April.
No, I mean
Start.
after the next year,
Oh, I see. Yeah, that, I would agree with you, so we don't disrupt
every time.
every time. That's right.
Something else.
So, but these are things that we're kind of working with, and I'm sure they'll be all kind of figured out as we go forward. Other questions as it relates to that? Okay. And again, these order blanks are here. I'll make them more available to you out by the food, because I know you're going to be back out there. And you can feel free to take one. So at this point, I'd like to just introduce our new board members that are new to the board. And let's start with Hal. Where are you? Hal Sewell. You probably all know Hal, but Hal, if you would stand up. Hal is joining the board. For the first time this year. We also have added Maureen, and I don't think you all know Maureen. Maureen is now a board member, and the person that has probably the biggest job on the board, and it's the one that nobody likes to do, is secretary, and that's Carrie. Carrie, where are you? Carrie is very excited, lack of a better word, to be the secretary. She was doing a diligent job on Tuesday night, because there was a lot of stuff flying around and she was trying to capture it all. So kudos to her. I know being the secretary of an organization is not an easy chore. So we try to keep it organized, but when you get 5 or 6 people together trying to be heard, it's mass confusion. So those are the new board members, and what I'd like to do now is ask Evan if you would kind of give us a rundown on the money situation.
Yeah. So real quickly, we finished the year with $35,000 in the bank. So I know it seems like a lot, but it doesn't go far when you start making repairs around here. You know, chimneys need repair. As we mentioned, we're putting in a sidewalk, so we'll still be looking to get your support in 2020. So we hope you can open up and help us out in 2020. How many members got their newsletter already? Okay, great. So I've already got 6 membership renewal forms in my hand. So if you have a membership renewal form, please try to remember to get it in as quickly as possible. Yes?
I have a question. I noticed that the difference in property and equipment between 2018 and 2019.
23,000 of the porch.
What was it?
The porch.
Oh.
Yeah, we invested 23,000 to redo the front porch, so capitalize that, not expensive. So that's what it was. So the other is the house. The house was purchased back in 1990 for $35,000. So a rich sum back then, I guess. So we'll take offers. No, I'm just kidding. If you don't have a newsletter, Maureen says we have blank membership application form. So if you're not a member or didn't get your newsletter, get a form. And that's all. Thanks.
Yep. We always have lots of membership applications laying around. Carrie, do you have anything you want to add or say or
No,
deny?
I'm good. I'm excited to be here, and I'm looking forward to a productive year. And
Good. All right. Hal, anything you want to throw out at us?
Nothing I think of.
Okay. Jennifer, where's Jennifer? Oh, there she is. Anything that you want to add, Jennifer?
no, we're good.
Okay. Well, I might just mention that one of the things that we're trying to do on the board is to, I don't want to say give everybody a job, but make people, have people responsible for various things. And Jennifer has willingly stepped forward and said she would take care of facilities.
The total overflow is coming.
So we're still trying to define what facilities mean, but that's a pretty broad title. And as we go forward, I'm sure we'll narrow it down. And again, Jennifer's more than willing to step up to that. Maureen?
Of course I have something to say. Do I have to use this? Can everybody hear me if I don't use it? Use it. All right, okay. All right, so starting off 2020 with a wonderful addition to our Chief McIntosh Creek Indian exhibit that we have in the Senoia room, which is the first room there. We have 12 small arrowheads that have been taken from the Dead Oak Farm property here in Senoia. So I invite you when the program is over to take a look at those. They're in the first black case there. So that's how the museum is starting 2020. We're pretty happy about that. 2020 is obviously a celebration year for us. And on July 11th, 2010, we opened these doors for the first time to just a few local people. And look where we are now. So I'm going to ask you to mark your calendar for July the 18th, 2020. We will be having an event right here on the grounds of the museum, and more details for that will follow. And for anyone who is feeling nostalgic, besides me of course, for the last 10 years that have passed, there's an actual history book now. Here it is, if I can hand it out. It chronicles the last 10 years. The beginning of the book deals with a year on a page, and then halfway through the book, it's the annual events. So you want to take a look at that, and if anyone besides me would be interested in having one of those books, we are doing pre-orders for them, so just let me know if you'd like to do that. It's a wonderful book. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you. We will also be having a grand gala that will culminate everything at the end of the year in October. We don't have an exact date for that yet, but just be prepared. Go out, get yourself a really gorgeous dress, and come to the great gala that we'll be having in October. The museum, of course, would not be a museum without our docents. So thank you to everyone who has been a docent. And if you think you might want to be, we are doing, if you've read your newsletter, you know we're doing a docent training or orientation on Monday, January 20th at 10 o'clock right here. So if you have an interest in what exactly happens here, this would be a good opportunity for you to come and see what it's like to be a docent. And last but not least, we are also starting 2020 on Instagram. Yay! Okay. For those of you who know me, you know the only thing I can do technologically related is send a text. So I do not know what it means to be on Instagram, but I've been told that I'm supposed to tell everybody, follow and tag us at Senoia _ area, historical underlying thing. I don't know how you do Instagram, but you do, right? So look us up. We're on there now too. So we're on Facebook, we're on TripAdvisor, now we're on Instagram. So we just keep moving forward. That's it for me. Anybody have any questions?
Cost of the book.
The book, yes. The book is $30 for members and $35 for non-members.
Okay. Well, I'm looking forward to that October gala and seeing Doug in his fancy new dress.
Already shopping.
With that, I will call Beth. Where are you?
Here I am.
Beth is, as you know, our program coordinator, director. So she's going to tell you about the program this evening.
Thanks. And welcome, Dennis,
Oh, thank you.
Mr. President. Well, you did it. You made it. It's 2020. Yay! Our first program starting our anniversary year. So we're thrilled to have you. I'm going to begin, before I introduce our keynote speaker, I want to begin at the beginning, as one should, and tell you a little bit about how we got here. Back in July of 2019, as our guest, we had Carla Cook Smith, who came and spoke to us. I'm going to put my book down. Spoke to us about her novel, Parakeets in Whitesburg. And so her story took up how the lives of those who were affected by murder in Coweta County progressed after the trial. And as her guest, she brought Mark Puckett, who is here with us this evening. Mark is an employee with the Visitors Bureau at the Historic Courthouse in Union. But he brought all of the things that you see on this table, he brought in July. Because of the time frame of the murder in Coweta County, there were Sacred Harp singings, as I understand, at the courthouse at that time. So that evening, it was like a light bulb moment for me, because I had this sort of faded memory of my childhood of going to my dad's family reunions and hearing this singing. Now, my dad always called it fa sol la singing, so I wasn't familiar with the term Sacred Heart. But anyway, when I got home that evening, I dug up my dad's book, and this is the 1960 edition of the Sacred Heart book, so it's a treasure for me. He's not with us anymore. But I remember as a child thinking it was kind of odd. It was sort of an a cappella form of singing, and the older relatives were the ones who usually participated, and they always had their arms going up and down, counting time. And I remember at the time that most of the books were read. So I see that you've got some of the read hymnals here. And we'll hear more about the technique. It's sort of a uniquely American style of singing, and we'll hear more about that later. But anyway, so Mark, I pursued Mark over months and said, we'd love to have you come and do a program. And he said, I would be thrilled to do it, but I know a guy. So he got me in touch with a gentleman named John Plunkett, who sadly was supposed to join us this evening and was ill and not able to come. But John, I believe, is the curator, he's on the board of the Sacred Heart Publishing, and was supposed to be here this evening, but as John and I emailed one another, he said, but you know what? I know a guy. And so tonight, as our guest speaker, we have Nathan Reese, who his day job is a assistant professor at the University of West Georgia in Carrollton, but I found out through our emails that there is a Sacred Heart Museum in Carrollton, Georgia. Who knew? To have Mark and Nathan with us this evening, so please join me in welcoming Nathan to the stage.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Whether fortunately or unfortunately, it finally got to me, and I don't know a guy, so here I am. But no, I'm delighted to be here. I'm so excited to learn a little bit more about what's happening over here as well too. Had so much fun with conversation, seeing some of these exhibits earlier, and it's just been a really enjoyable evening for me already. So thank you so much for welcoming me here. It's really fun. I'm gonna make sure I'm not too much in the way, but I think we can manage this. So I'm going to give you a very brief introduction to Sacred Harp singing, and I could probably talk for just about as long as anybody has hours for, but I'm going to keep it short for you tonight and just hit some of the highlights. Just for a little bit of introduction, so my name is Nathan Reese. I teach art history. I get to participate in the world of Sacred Harp, not only through attending singings, but also through being the curator at the Sacred Harp Museum. And we have a small facility, but it has a great collection, and it's been a really fun and a rewarding thing for me to do as well. So I won't give you all the details about any of that, but if you would like to stop by sometime, we're just south of Carrollton. Easiest way to get in touch with me is to just type in the Google or whatever, just type in Sacred Heart Museum and it'll have some contact information, and I would be very, very happy to meet you there sometime and give you a tour. So for tonight, I want to talk about Sacred Harp generally, but also specifically in relation to its connection to Georgia history. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Sacred Harp's history and traditions, also talk a little bit about Sacred Harp's practice as well too. And the best place to start with that is with these two folks right here. This is B.F. Benjamin Franklin White and his wife Thurza White. He was the person who put together the Sacred Harp Songbook in 1844. Correct here. And what makes Sacred Harp unique, actually, is that in its current expression, it's really not just a book. It's not just a type of music, but it's a whole kind of a community. And I'll get to that momentarily, but when it first started out, it really wasn't all that unique. It was just one of a whole bunch of books that were published, mostly informally in the United States, that compiled together music that was familiar and that was popular. So at the time this came out, it seems a little bit maybe counterintuitive, just because of what Sacred Harp kind of seems like maybe more old-timey or something like this. At the time, of course, it was just a form of popular music that was very familiar to a lot of people around the United States. And it also has a history that extends back before this book. And that's actually, to me, one of the most interesting things about the Sacred Harp tradition, is that we have music that's mostly from the United States that dates back just about as far as music was being published in the United States. And this is actually an example of this. This is one of the covers. Beautiful books, yes. This was from a singing school teacher and a musician and a composer, the first one to publish a book of engraved music in the United States, William Billings from Boston. So this was published, he actually started around 1770, and they have these beautiful engraved books. This actually, by the way, the engraving on that was done by Paul Revere, in case that's a name you're familiar with. So well connected at that time in Boston around the time of the American Revolution. And at that time, because of some probably very obvious political reasons, American composers started to think outside the realm of just bringing in more British stuff. And it became a really popular form to write books, usually just small books with publications by individual composers that were new, unique American things. And this is where a lot of the music that's still in the Sacred Harp actually originated from. So that's one part of the mix. Another part of the mix is music that was composed all throughout the 19th century. So people kept composing music, mostly sacred music, that ended up in the Sacred Harp. And around the year 1800, a couple of different people kind of competing with each other right at about the same time came up with a new invention to make music much easier to sing. That was actually the purpose, and you might be familiar with this concept, shaped notes. So this is an example. This is actually a scan from one of the 19th century editions of the Sacred Harp, where instead of just having the traditional round shape of the notes, they came up with this theory where if you had 4 different shapes, they would correspond with the 4 different tones, fa, sol, la, and mi, that made up the basis of the scale. And now if you're thinking we're missing about 3 notes, that's because you are used to the European system of notation, which became popular in the US a little bit later in the 19th century. Prior to that, they were using a system that actually dates all the way back to the Elizabethan era in England, where instead of worrying about the notes, they were worrying about the intervals. And if you're curious about that, I can tell you about it in more detail a little later on. But I'm not a professional musician, so I'll warn you right now that I can get in over my head if I try to talk about that too much. But that's kind of the point behind these notes, is that it's made to make music democratic. And that was such an important concept in the early history of America. The idea was you shouldn't have to go get an education, learn this complicated system of understanding where different tones go along a scale. You should be able to just learn these 4 shapes, and then if you can learn to associate those with different tones, then you can sing anything that was written in this system. And that's the theory behind it. So if you look at the scale right here, I've got a more modern example. That fa is a triangle, you got sol is a circle, la is a rectangle, and then we get all the way up to the top of the scale, we've got mi right there, and it starts back over with fa. So if you sing a scale in shape notes, it'll be fa, sol, la, mi, fa. And if you do that a whole bunch, then eventually you can just rattle it all off without even stopping to think twice. And for some of you who, maybe if you're interested in this, by the way, everybody's always welcome to come to a Sacred Harp singing. If this seems a little bit complicated, if you're starting maybe a little bit older in life, it might not be quite as simple. But one of the things that I get to do is go help out with an organization, an event called Camp Fossil Law, that's held every year in Alabama, where little tiny kids, and you'd have to see this to believe it, but people who are like 6 years old can just look at a page of music and just instantly sight read it, because the system really does actually work quite effectively. So that's the whole purpose behind this. And that's really what forms the basis of the Sacred Harp Songbook, is a whole bunch of music composed almost exclusively in America, bunches of it from the 18th century, lots of it from the early 19th century, and then continuing on. B.F. White actually was a composer himself, but most of the music in the book is not by him. A small minority, less than 10%, are actually by him. Instead, most of the music is by other people that he knew, in addition to these songs that he sourced from earlier publications. And that includes a lot of people, and a lot of people with a history in Georgia. So B.F. White actually lived down in Hamilton, if you've been down there towards Columbus. I think it's Harris County. That sounds right, yeah. That's kind of the original area where it was popular, but then within about a generation, it became very popular up closer to this part of the world. And some of you might be familiar with these folks, and I see one of them actually right here. And we have an expert, by the way, with much, much, much more depth of knowledge if you're interested in learning about some of the contributors to the Sacred Harp from this part of the world, including these 2 brothers. They're actually twins, H.S. and J.P. Reese, who were lived in different parts of Georgia, but ultimately H.S. settled over in Turin, and then J.P. was in Union. And both of them were prolific songwriters and music leaders. They contributed over a dozen each. In fact, I think J.P. has something like 25 songs that are still in the Sacred Harp today. And they had a very big influence over their long lives as well, too. So H.S. Over here was actually born in 1828 and died in 1922. So had a very long span of influence within the Sacred Harp. If you check out a Sacred Harp, you can look at page 321. The song is named Noonan. There's one on page 39 that's named Sharpsburg. And we can just kind of keep going through and seeing a bunch of names that might ring a bell or seem a little bit familiar to people around this part of the world. So it's very much a local heritage. One thing that is also really unique about the Sacred Harp is that it has never gone out of print. If you think about what that means, a book that was published in 1844 and is still in print, There are not too many of those, certainly that I'm aware of. And it's a spectacular thing. Not only that, it's been revised periodically to maintain the original character of the book, but to also add in new music. And this has been one of the most important parts of this tradition continuing into the present, is that it is not just a book that's a historical reenactment, but something that contemporary people are still working within this kind of stylistic idiom and creating new compositions that sound like Sacred Harp music and are written with the shaped notes right up through the present. So I have a selection of 20th century books there. This is actually the current edition of the book, and Mark brought a bunch of historical and contemporary books. So check those out. It's a really great illustration. I appreciate that. This one was done in 1991. We are actually in the process right now of revising the book for a new generation. And I can tell you, as part of the committee that is undertaking this work, that we have already sung through, I think, 450 compositions that have been submitted, and we're anticipating maybe another 500. So if you'd like to send a song in that you want to get in the book, you're most welcome to do that. I will warn you, the odds are maybe not in your favor, but it's a wonderful thing to realize the interest, the continuing interest in this tradition that still exists. And one more reason why that's the case has to do with something else that B.F. White contributed. So lots of other people came up with lots of other books, but B.F. White came up with an organization called the Southern Musical Convention. And that became the model for a bunch of other Sacred Harp singing conventions. That one was established in 1845. A few years later, they established one called the Chattahoochee Convention in 1852. That one still meets. It's met every year, if you can imagine this. History, it's met every single year mostly within Carroll County, but it has actually met in Coweta County in the past, I believe, since 1852, with the exception of, I think, 1861 through 5. I can't imagine why. Anyway, this organization created a kind of a framework so that not only do you have a book with music, but you also have a kind of a social context for it. And that's such an important thing for any kind of a tradition, that it's a way that people get together, they see each other regularly, just like they did in the 19th century. People are still doing that in the 21st century. We get together all the time. We all know each other pretty well. It's not a huge family, is it? I have a couple of Sacred Harp singing friends back in the back, and it's a wonderful kind of a social organization where people are invested not only in the music and its performance and in the history, but also in each other. And I think that really is probably the reason why all these other books, the Southern Harmony and the Kentucky Harmony and the on and on and on and on, and I could name another 100 books, nobody is familiar with those. And they just kind of disappeared after the time that they were used, but the Sacred Harp became not just a book, but a whole musical culture, really. I have some examples, actually. These are kind of fun illustration. This is a woman in Mississippi actually did this embroidery I think she actually did this in the 1940s, but it's a memory from her early years in the 1870s at a Sacred Harp singing convention. And they still look pretty much like that today. So here's actually the Chattahoochee Convention just a year or so ago. We love to sing in little wooden churches, if at all possible. We love to sing in big, beautiful courthouses. We get an opportunity once a year in October to do that up here in Noonan, and you should definitely stop by and check it out. One of the other things about Sacred Harp that's kind of surprising is we don't actually perform. So there is no sense of us practicing and then having a performance at all. It's just you get together and sing, and when people show up just to listen, they're always welcome, but we think it's kind of odd. It's like, well, why don't you just sing along as long as you're here? It's the kind of music that was always intended to be accessible. All the way back to when they invented these shaped notes, the whole point was anybody should be able to do this, and we still very much maintain that idea. And if you've heard me sing it all, then you'll know you don't have to really be an expert singer. You don't have to be trained. You don't have to have a particular kind of a voice at all. We just get together and we sing. And I'll give you a couple of examples here just momentarily. And we sing in a kind of a style that reflects that as well. A lot of people think it is maybe a little bit unpolished, and they're probably correct. But we like that. We like that kind of a sound because that means that there's no threshold, there's no bar you have to meet. You can just show up and sing and have fun. So one more, to me, very surprising thing, and I think this would definitely have surprised B.F. White if he were still around to know about this, is that Sacred Harp has rapidly expanded in terms of its geographical reach within about the last generation or so. And I actually have a map that illustrates this. And it's an astonishing thing. So it started in Georgia and then very quickly moved to Alabama and also Texas. Within, I don't know, the first 50, 60 years of Sacred Harp Singing's existence, it gradually spread to Tennessee, Mississippi, and Florida. But if you were to go to a Sacred Harp Singing prior to 1975, it would have been in one of those 5 states. That was the only places it existed. And it was very much associated with rural country life. There were singings that happened in the city, but every time, for instance, the Atlanta papers would write about Sacred Harp conventions, it was always through kind of the lens of like these country people getting together in this giant convention hall or whatever. And it was at times thousands of people that would show up. But it was always associated with the rural South. Well, after about 1975 or so, people in other parts of the country became very interested in it. People had known about it, always. The book is actually, by the way, printed in Philadelphia, so it was never something that was just uniquely known to the Southeast, but it was only practiced in the South. And then around 1975 or so, people from different places started getting more interested, and a remarkable thing happened. When folks in Michigan or in Vermont or in New York got in touch with people down here in this part of the country and asked, could they come to singings, they were not only welcomed in, but people around here were like, well, you should start your own singing. And there's no reason why you can't. And people had obviously been starting lots of singings around this part of the world. So people took this music and embraced it. And now you can go to singings. I don't know if you can quite tell from this map, but as the colors get lighter, that shows the more recent spread of these singings. In addition to this, and I don't have a map to show this, you can also go to Sacred Harp Singings in 10 other countries around the world. Mostly in Western Europe. Obviously English-speaking places tend to be more interested in Sacred Harp as a tradition, but I went to a Sacred Harp Singing in Ireland last year and one in Germany last year, and it's really an astonishing thing to be able to just walk into this group of however many hundred, mostly German people, and just pick right up and do the same exact thing that you would do over here in the courthouse in Newton. So it's a surprising recent development in Sacred Harp's trajectory. We have lots of peculiar things about the way we sing, and I won't get into all the details about it. Mentioned already the leading time. That's something that also has to do with this idea of it being very democratic and accessible. We don't do like fancy conducting. Nobody's gonna cut you off or do this kind of stuff. We just do very simple up and down motions to mark time, and I'll show you an example of this here in just a moment. And the other thing that really sets Sacred Harp apart is we don't have anybody who's in charge. We just get together and we'll elect somebody to be the chairperson of a convention, but really all they do is just make sure that like the food shows up at lunch. And the singing is all just done by the participants. So if you go to a singing, typically just every person who wants to can get up, stand in the middle of the square, and then lead a couple of songs of their choice out of the Sacred Harp. It's set up in a way so that each of the different vocal parts is on a different part of the square. You have the men singing bass on this side. The melody that we call the tenor is on the main part of the church, typically if it's in a church or the biggest part of the room. We've got a higher part that's called the treble. It's actually a harmony part. It's not the soprano that's over on this side. Men and women both sing that, and we have an alto part that would be behind it. So it's the original surround sound, I've heard it described as, and it's quite a sound. How many of you have actually been to a Sacred Harp singing? Oh, excellent. Okay, so a bunch of you. Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah. Maybe you can attest to this. It can be kind of loud, and especially in some of these little wooden churches. If you pack 120 people in there, I've been to singings, in fact, where they have had the windows open and people like just leaning in and just the whole place completely packed out. And it's quite an experience. Oh yeah, sure. So there's a little church called Shoal Creek that's over in Talladega National Forest. Is that where it is? It's just no electricity or anything else, and it's an amazing place to get a sense of what it must have been like to sing back. I'll pull up a video and give you a little bit of an example, give you a little bit of a feel of what Sacred Harp is like. But mostly I want to encourage you to go attend one. And since we're now in the internet age, and there are actually lots and lots of young people singing Sacred Harp these days, that really helps as well too. It's just as easy as typing it in an internet search to find out where all the different Sacred Harp singings are. But we also do have a physical printed minutes book. And I think, unfortunately, my friend John was going to bring some of those. I don't know if we may have one or two copies. If somebody would like to have a paper copy that has a schedule of all the singings that take place throughout the year, you're always welcome. Typically what happens, excellent, okay. Typically what happens is we get together at about maybe 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning, sing until lunchtime. People bring a wonderful potluck meal. We have dinner on the grounds for about an hour, and then we start singing back up at about 1 o'clock and go to maybe 2:30, 3 o'clock or something like that. And that's pretty much all that happens in a singing. It's just people get up and sing one song after another from the Sacred Harp. I will play a video here momentarily. I also am happy to answer any questions that you might have. And as I kind of reset this momentarily, it might actually be a good time to ask for questions while I do that. Does anybody have any questions right off, please?
Does Sacred Heart refer to the voice? Is that the Sacred Heart?
Yes, okay, so that's a great question. Why is it called the Sacred Harp? This is very confusing for people who have shown up at singings and are looking for, which does occasionally happen. But the answer to that, where's my mouse? Oh, there we go. Okay. Almost there. All right, excellent. Well, the answer to that is actually that a lot of the tune books in the 19th century were named after musical instruments, and in particular after instruments that are mentioned in the Bible. So there's also a sacred lyre and a sacred melodeon and a timbrel. I don't even know what that is. I'm told it's some kind of instrument. And this one just happened to be the harp. And it's really more kind of a legend, I think, that grew up over time, but it's become so pervasive in our way of thinking, and it makes so much sense that we just embrace it now. And so that's what we'll tell people is, yes, so the Sacred Harp is the instrument that you have naturally. And of course, we don't sing with any instruments. It's all a cappella, so the Sacred Harp then is the human voice. Yeah. That's a great question. Any other questions? Or I'll play a little sample here.
One more.
Oh, please, yeah.
So were they taking old music and making it into this? Or were they writing music specifically for Sacred Harp? Or did they convert music that was already written into this format to you?
Oh, that's a great question. The answer is all of the above. So some of the songs that we sing would be very, very familiar, like Old 100, if anybody knows the doxology, is in the Sacred Harp, and that, I have no idea how old that is. And that would be an example where they harmonized it in a way that sounds appropriate for the four voices of Sacred Harp and set it in shaped notes. Other times they took music that was relatively new and was actually composed for shaped notes, and then kind of just brought it into the Sacred Harp. We would use the word plagiarize in the 21st century, but they didn't really care. So like an example of that would be Amazing Grace. It's actually composed as a shaped note hymn for another book a little bit earlier and then brought into the Sacred Harp. But the majority of the music was actually composed by Sacred Harp composers. So if you have a chance to look at a Sacred Harp, and I'll have an example here, and there's some others up here, probably the majority of it would be unfamiliar to you, that they really only just exist within the Sacred Harp world. And I'll show you in a second here in this example that part of the reason for that is that you can do things with Sacred Harp singing that you can't with other musical forms because it's in those four independent parts. So for instance, just a couple things that you can do very easily. If the bass wants to sing higher than the treble part, that actually happens on occasion in our book. you'd have a hard time notating that in music that you're going to also be playing on a piano for your regular hymnal. So the music is much more melodic within each of the individual parts you'd find in general. And then the other thing is that we have a lot of music that comes out of the early American tradition, where they were also sitting in this arrangement as they sang, and they do something that we call fuguing, which means that one part comes in and then another part comes in, and they don't all line up, and create kind of a musical texture.
We call that a round in the South.
Around, okay.
So for each of the 4 sections, did they each have different notes they were following?
Yes, so if you check out one of these hymnals, you'll see that all of the hymns are written in either 3, sometimes there's no alto part, but usually 4 different lines of music, each of which only have one set of notes on. So it's not like the typical hymnal that has, the right hand and the left hand, that you have instead just an individual line of music that each one of the parts is singing. Good question. Any other questions? I'll be around, obviously, and so if you think of other questions, then definitely let me know, but I think maybe it would be fun to see a little bit about what this looks like. And this was actually a documentary that was produced 10 years ago about Sacred Heart singing, where they did an intensive video production at a Sacred Heart convention over in Alabama, and then for a variety of reasons, they never actually completed the film. So you're going to see some footage that you can't see anywhere else. That's some really, I think, good quality. And let me see if I've got this all set to go. Okay, so just to give a little bit of commentary now that you've seen that, every single time that we sing, we always sing what we call sing the shapes. So everybody actually vocalizes that fossil law, just like the different shapes are 4. And then one leader will just come right on up after the next and get to choose a song. And she usually sings super fast, so I think we can watch this in about 1 minute. right. Well, if you have any more questions, I'm going to let y'all go now. But if you do have any more questions, then please feel free to grab me afterward. Thank you so much for inviting me here. And I see one little hand. Please pray for it.
Do you have enough here that know it, that y'all could do something?
I wish we could. We're going to have a couple more people that are going to come join us, and I think with the three of us, it'd be like trying to demonstrate a marching band with two clarinets. So I'm not going to do that. I do have one little thing, though, by the way, that we brought from the Sacred Harp Publishing Company. We have a book about the history of Sacred Harp, and we got a really fantastic grant funding that allowed us to publish these, so we're able to just give those away. So if any of you would like to have a copy of these, I believe I have 35, so I may not have quite enough for everybody. John was also going to bring a few more of these, so I apologize if I don't have quite enough for everybody, but please feel free to take one of these with our compliments. So thank you so much.
Can we get one for our library?
Oh, absolutely. Definitely, yes, we have. Thank you.
We do have some singers here in the audience who came planning to sing, and I know John was going to sort of put that together, and unfortunately he couldn't be with us. So I am sorry about that, because I was looking forward to hearing it live as well. Now, if the Spirit moves you and you want to just jump in, go ahead. But as you can see, it's better in a group. We could pass out some music and give it a try, but I think that's a big ask.
Next time.
That's right. I did want to also mention all of the materials that are up here are Mark's personal materials. He brought those this evening, and please stick around. Now, I will say these gentlemen came straight from work. They've not had dinner, so maybe don't stick around too long. But ask questions and really peruse the material, because it's truly fascinating. I want to take one more second of your time. We've obviously kicked off the year 2020 with a bang, so I'm just thrilled that you all came. Next month will be on February the 13th, so the day before Valentine's, and our guest will be Ashley Brownlee of Ashley's Garden here on Main Street, or in town. And so please come. It's going to be a fantastic program. As a matter of fact, we're going to have a bunch of fantastic programs. So we look forward to seeing you the second Thursday of every month. Thanks so much, guys. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Beth. It's always nice to have a good program to participate in, and Beth does a wonderful job, so we really appreciate it. So I'd also like to mention to you folks, if you have ideas or complaints, whatever, get a hold of one of the board members, get a hold of me, get a hold of Maureen, whatever, because, yes, we're the board, but it's your organization. It's not ours. We're just in there, we're in the mix with you guys. So let us know what you're thinking, let us know what we're doing right, let us know what we're doing wrong, and let us know what we can do better. Because with that, we can take this thing to new heights. So thank you very much for being here, and stick around.
I can tell you all want to sing. You'd be better than glad.